So the oldest has two girls,
Okay.
and the next has one daughter, who's the youngest.
Okay.
And then the next has two, and the youngest has four.
Oh, four.
So, are we close?
Wow.
Yeah, we're about ready. So,
You'll give me the signal when we're on?
yeah. So it's live now. So.
Okay, so we should turn our mics on?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Okay, we can start, I think.
We can start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon and welcome to this exploration of faith formation in young adults. I'm Raleigh Martinson. I come to this particular event from a study I did of worship, faith, and spirituality at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. I'm delighted to have with me a campus minister from the University of Minnesota.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I know some of you. I'm Kate Ryer-Welton. I'm the campus pastor at the U of M Twin Cities.
Our work today will be divided into 4 sections. The first, the wider framework, will be to consider or get into the faith formation, obviously, of young adults. But the 4 sections will first, in the first section, explore some of the, if you will, life experience, both internally, relationally, as well as culturally, of young adults, and we'll use some of the great many materials that are available to us from studies of millennials. The second will highlight faith practices that are emerging, sometimes called the best practices or best faith practices, others practices of promise. Thirdly, I'll take us into a summary of the study that we did together at Concordia College in Moorhead. And fourthly, several of you have already sent in questions, and so Kate and I will explore some of the interesting challenges, information that you posed in those questions. We'll pause. I'll do some presenting in each of these sections, and then Kate and I will get into some exploration of the subject matter in each of them. First, young adults. Who are these young people with whom we have the great delight of living mutually, asserting what we know, each of us, and asking of each other that which we need to know in the journey of life? There are incredible numbers of studies. I'll introduce you along the way tangentially to 4 or 5 of them, which I find to be generative and helpful. But these studies probably come about in part because this group of humankind, among the generations, Strauss and Howe have helped us understand some of the power of generational thinking, is so huge. Numbers vary, but if we use the birth dates of 1982 to 2002, there's some 83 million human beings in the United States in this age category. So what I'll do is quickly, and you can see on the screens behind me, these 13 elements that I'll just quickly identify as a part of a mosaic of what I find to be most helpful as I think about ministry with young adults. Diverse and celebrate diversity. You all know about the demographics and the changes and shifts in race and ethnicity, and in fact the multiple ways in which young people, young adults, regularly are deftly bridging and interacting with one another and across cultures. The one element of diversity that is oftentimes for young adults, however, dividing is that of class. And I discovered as I've gotten into relationships with my young adult colleagues and friends that socioeconomic factors are hugely divisive and regularly difficult to bridge. Technologically immersed, these young men and women, as we know, have grown up as natives, but I find it important not just to identify this as something of a trait, but to understand that the experience of communication for young adults is not simply technological, but what we've got now are human beings who from birth have lived in a three-layered communicative world of oral communication, print communication, and digital communication. And it's been my experience in ministry, if ministry is going to be effective with young adults, it's critical that there is a layering and integrating of face-to-face oral, of substantive, organized print processes with always 24/7 connective digital communication. So it's interesting to think about this technical age and how transmedial communication is critical in terms of ministry. Technological consumers, I was just talking with Kate, I have 9 grandkids between the ages of 6, 7, and 23, and it's just amazing for me to try to stay up with the number of devices they have and the number of apps that they have on their devices. They're regularly curating those for me and programming my devices. It's just amazing to try to stay with the ongoing flow of devices into the lives of young men and women. Ambient awareness. There are varying ways of talking about this. Multitasking is one of them, but I don't find that to be most helpful. What's most helpful for me is to discover how quickly young adults become bored with mono-communicative processes and how multiple stimuli are their common consciousness. And if one is going to be engaging with young adults, most often it requires working in more than one mode of stimulation. Life is fluid, fast-paced, I think, constantly changing. In fact, Jeffrey Arnett's notion of emerging adulthood is one way of talking about young adulthood, focuses on this as a journey, time of journey among human beings rather than a stated or fixed place. And this emerging in process way of life means there's just a lot of letting go and become accustomed to change. And so I find delightful as I work in ministry, and sometimes overwhelming, how open to and demanding of change in modes of ministry that young adults are. Authenticity foremost. The young men and women with whom I share life and do ministry can smell someone trying to deceive them a long ways away. At least they call me out regularly. And in terms of ministry, I find that being who one is, even if that means being imperfect and failing with some regularity, is much more honest and open and connecting and engaging with them than pretending to be something that one isn't. The one issue in all of that I find somewhat paradoxical is in some of the programs of media, the developing of a public persona a la celebrity that isn't always as honest and accurate in terms of the portrayal of who a young adult is. So there's this deep commitment to and sensibility toward authenticity. At the same time, there's a kind of public presentation that's not always authentic. optimistic and at the same time realistic. I love this as I engage life. There's both a kind of upbeat, bright openness and intelligence to what I experience with a great many persons with whom I'm in ministry, young adults in ministry. At the same time, there's an insistence about calling a thing what it is and starting from a baseline of can we in fact agree that we will name things as they are and they will be a part of whatever we do. Some people say that young adults these days are egocentric. I've not found that to be terribly prevalent. I think there is a certain amount of that in terms of developing identity. But I find young adults really interested in discovering other people's sense of the world, so they're curious. I discover they're, out of their passion, willing to give large amounts of time and money. I think they do this very differently than their parents might or others, but I see them to be incredibly oriented to reaching out and in compassionate ways working toward justice and service in the world. Belonging a high priority. We'll get at this in just a minute. My sense of young adults is that a great many have grown up in homes where their parents have been many times good friends and have reached into their lives, and now as they move from being children out into a more independent world where they have to work out life on their own, that to be in communities where they're welcomed, respected for who they are is critical, so that having communities of identity are critical. Identity struggles. I remember the first time I read Alexandria Robbins' book, Quarter Life Crisis, and she laid out, particularly at that point in time, the difficulty in the economy of young adults coming through preparatory processes for career and so forth, finding a place in the larger economic sphere and some of the difficulty that creates. And also, following with Jeffrey Arnett's work, not a whole lot of good, clear rites of passage into adulthood. The notion of, as a young adult, finding a place to fit in and an identity as being a long period of time of struggle and needing support. Selective sex. It's fascinating to me to talk with young adults and to see how they think about sexual interaction in terms of safety, protection, in terms of a part of a relational process, and how to ferret out what safety means in terms of being abused or used or being mutual in terms of sexual experience. I find sexual young adults to be far more sophisticated sexually than my experience of their parents' generation and certainly mine. Skeptical of institutions. A good many young adults I talk to are not really interested in propping up and becoming a part of committees and institutional processes, but want to work with groups of people to get at life itself, and consequently, in terms of ministry, don't find themselves drawn to the institutional perpetuation of the church, including official roles of ministry. So, Kate, I've used a quite exhaustive list. There's a whole lot more out there. You are far more deeply engaged day to day with young adults as persons and groups of persons. As you've been listening to this, I'd be interested in what your thoughts are.
When you were talking through this list, I got hung up on the authenticity because my experience of our young adults, and many of our young adults are from Minnesota, and we are a Lutheran ministry in Minnesota, and so that comes with all sorts of kind of cultural baggage. Probably half of the students that are active aren't actually Lutheran, but that's just the context that I'm coming from. Probably also maybe 60% are hard sciences people and business students, so we don't have the kind of liberal arts background. and that's helpful because that maybe shapes some of what my understanding of young adults is. But the my experience has been they crave authenticity, but that they don't experience freedom to actually consider what it is that really means, because they're so used to performing and pleasing. And it's a real issue for us. And we try really hard to model vulnerability, to model authenticity, to model imperfection. We talk about that with our student leaders, what it means to model weak faith, instead of everybody feeling like they have to have a strong faith, as if those are even biblical categories of strong and weak faith. So to create communities of authenticity and hope, I think, is one of our most challenging calls and one of our most important calls, because it's within that context that risk-taking can actually happen.
So it's one thing to seek authenticity, to look for it.
Yeah.
It's another thing to have the personal capacities, either as an individual or in relationships, to in fact get it, understand it, pursue it, or in fact live it. It requires a certain level of self-awareness and being able to speak out of that. It requires a certain openness and safety in terms of being vulnerable. I mean, I heard you talk about that. And one of the ways in which ministry can in fact be facilitated in that yearning, in that seeking, is to practice some of those processes.
Yeah.
Naming, being vulnerable, living with the backside of life.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the back of the house, the back of the Facebook profile, whatever it is.
Yeah. So how do you do some of that? You model it, huh? In terms of, you're talking about your own being.
Yeah, so we work really hard with we have a core team of servant leaders, we call them. And I work hard amongst them to model imperfection and striving and longing in my own life. And then we have explicit conversations about what it means to we watch Brene Brown's TED Talk in our Leader Bible Study every semester. Because people always get something new out of that, have a conversation about how that interfaces with leadership. Because I think servant leadership and being a part of a group of folks that are trying to create a community, again, of authenticity and hope, is different than the kind of leadership that they're taught, particularly in our business schools and in our College of Science and Engineering. And if they're identified as leaders, it just looks very different. And so we have to undo some of that to think about what does it mean to be servant-hearted as a leader. They can then take that into business and do amazing things with it, but they're not getting that from their education.
So in some ways, campus ministry becomes a kind of counterculture, where this sensibility, this yearning, this critical element of being fully human, as well as spiritual, can be in fact exercised.
Ideally, that's what we're striving for.
Well, let's continue.
Keep going.
The second section that I want us to explore, it comes to focus, I think, on the questions of faith, religious experience, and spirituality. And if there's ever a place in the life of young adults, as I've had the privilege of knowing and experiencing this part of life, that's diverse, it's here. Incredible diversity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up on a number of studies: Pew Study, National Study of Religion, Youth and Religion, Mellon Study, some of Barna's work, and so on, to just get us a little bit of a snapshot of some of this diversity as a backdrop, alongside of who young adults are in general, to take a look at what we're working with here in terms of faith, spirituality, and religion. I find it fascinating, for example, to look at some of these stats. 78% believe in miracles, even more than believing in God. I don't quite put that all together, but it's fascinating to think that there's a great sense somehow that there is in the universe something larger, and there are forces at work that are hugely powerful and beyond perhaps even our capacity to describe them. 62% self-reportedly talk to God. Regularly, studies in young adults say that somewhere between 60 and 70% are praying in a variety of ways and exploring some of what they pray about. So there are clearly here spiritual practices, albeit individual in many cases, that come out of a sense of God's presence. Then we begin to see some of the shift of the leaving of institutions in terms of the latter two statistics here. Nearly 60%, Barna's discovered, and other studies lay this out as well, leave Christian churches between the ages of 20 and 30. And it's really interesting to imagine 50% of those who self-report as having a religious affiliation, that is, I'm a Baptist, a Lutheran, Catholic, whatever, but don't attend those congregations. So at least at this point, the disengagement with the church is huge. We're going to pick up with Bass's introducing a fascinating set of ideas in terms of how young adults participate in meaning-making, participate in faithing, to use one of her words, and spirituality. Believing, belonging, behaving, she argues, has been, over the years, the way in which humankind have regularly been immersed in a particular belief system or drawn to a particular belief system. And because they have a common belief system, then they group together and belong and have relationships. And out of that, there's a particular behavior shaped. I think, and I've had some conversation with others, including Dorothy, about some of these things, that there still is some of this occurring. In the Concordia study, we found that there are a number of young people who are meaning-making, asking questions of what matters, what makes a difference, what ultimately is important. And questions even raised around vocation are drawing young people into interest, into ministry. So one of the questions I think we need to ask is, might this still be one way of thinking about developing ministry around questions of meaning-making that then, in the processes, the very processes of exploring them, lead to belonging, and out of that, then shaping behavior. The one Bass and others talked about mostly is belonging, behaving, and believing, and I find this in the ministries that I've studied to be the primary way in which young people gather around religious practices, religious communities these days. Out of being welcomed as they are, coming to be a part of a small group perhaps, but then larger groups. And in that process, the group norms then shape behavior, and out of the community and the shaping of behavior come then questions around what do we value, what do we believe in, and even learning believing narratives. But then I also find the third one to be at work in the lives of many in ministry. I talked and interviewed at Concordia a young man whose first experience really with faith was a justice journey where they went to a country in Central America, and out of his experience of exploring and being a part of advocacy, came to be a member of a community that during the rest of the year studied together in these issues, and then carried on picked up some advocacy in the local community, and out of that started looking at the narratives, the Christ narrative particularly, in terms of belief processes. So I don't know what you out there are working with in terms of these notions, but I found them to be helpful ways of thinking about how faith gets formed with young adults. Then to give you two quick snapshots, and we won't spend much time with it, but I find these to be helpful in terms of as I get to know young adults and spend time with them in terms of how they express their faith. And particularly now, this gets personal with me, as I have 5 of my 9 grandchildren in this place as I journey with them. The Christian Smith et al. Have a 6-part typology where committed traditionalists, selective adherents, religiously indifferent, spiritually open, religiously disconnected, and positively irreligious is one way in which they interpreted what they heard from the young adults they spoke to. I discovered in the study that we did of Concordia College in Moorhead that we had all of these, perhaps not in the same percentages, but they were all there. Be interesting to see what you might have experienced as you've encountered persons at the university.
Yeah.
But it's, at least for me, rather than closing me in on how to think about young adults, it opens me up in terms of being careful to not pigeonhole or stereotype or think I've got things figured out in terms of where the approaches are. It also helps me understand something about how one might go about developing ministry with young adults. And then out of a study that's just been reported out that the Siebert Foundation and others funded a different typology that I think again lifts up and points out the great variation, and also for me some helpful ways to connect with young adults. Antagonists, philosophers, samplers, servers, tribers, leaders, believers, disciplers. I can think of young adults with whom I've engaged in mutual mentorship or mentoring, where they mentor me and I they, where in our conversations around meaning making, around faith, every one of these might be one way of thinking about them. I just had some great conversations with antagonists for whom they've said to me straight out, religion divides the world, creates enemies. Some of the worst atrocities have been have been carried out, and they named them. And so just to listen and pick up on has been an education for me and has changed some of my sensibilities in terms of these processes. Be interesting to see again what you experience at the university. So with that, I wish we were in a room together so we could talk with all of you in terms of all of this. I offer this snapshot of what's going on in terms of spirituality, religion, and faith as a way of opening up and nuancing that diversity. You, I would imagine, experience this every day.
Yeah. I find this Siebert study to be really helpful because I can see, well, there's, you can pan up and look at this 55,000 person university, and of course that's a different makeup than the composition in our little 50-person community. But even within the context of that community, there's people who walk in because we look like a church that don't even know what the Lord's Prayer is. They say, what are those words that we say before we eat the bread? To like born and raised kind of cradle Lutheran pastors' kids who are like deeply formed in the Christian tradition in a way that's meaningful to them and has really stuck. And so there's this whole range of folks. And so I think and I think the caution to me is to not want them to all get to the same place necessarily, but to recognize, and though I say this in words to them, but sometimes I think I might have a different agenda for them. That's me being vulnerable here. I think whatever it is that they bring into the community is a gift to that community, because it enlivens the community and our quest for the holy, and helps people find their own language, because this isn't a generation that's going to parrot back in the same way, or at least I hope they don't parrot back in the same way maybe that generations did before. Like, categorical imperatives just aren't satisfying for them. For our particular group of students, they want to spend hours defining terms, and I find that really helpful, because that's where you get at what it really is, what you mean when you say you believe in God. So, and then that conversation can happen if we're not using these categories that we tend to like to do as pastors. If you're not using those big words that you fleshed out for yourself in seminary or whatever, then there's lots of fun ways for people from all over the place to plug into that conversation, and it's meaningful for everyone.
So there's a shared journey with each person in part,
Yeah.
but also as a community
Yeah.
around discovering each person's experience,
Yeah.
and then finding language for what that experience is.
Good, thank you. Yeah.
And in that finding of language, coming to some common understandings of what the words, the concepts, the experiences are.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what that calls us into, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
What I find, I'd like to see what your experience is. In these journeys, I regularly find little, or if it's there, distorted narrative regarding the Christian the Christian experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Distorted narrative in terms of who Jesus is, even.
Yeah.
Distorted narrative in terms of what the church is. Or more than distorted, I guess, a lacunae. The young men and women have had other storytellers,
Yeah.
and good ones
Yeah.
in many cases.
Yeah.
Not always so good in terms of the commercialism around, but many times, I mean, the whole Harry Potter phenomena, Star Wars, all of that, that's there. Some really good narratives, but not a whole lot of the faith narrative of the Christian experience.
Yeah. Nor has there been any kind of, with our cradle Christians, so mostly mainline Protestants that find us, or lapsed Catholics, maybe a few evangelicals, but very little, no pressure, very little encouragement even to articulate what it is that they believe. And I think without that kind of invitation to try out language for what it is you believe, you think you know a whole lot more than you actually do about who it is that you are and who it is that God is in relationship to you and to this community. And so we really press people to do that, and it makes them uncomfortable, but they keep coming back. So and it doesn't have to be perfect. There's, again, this, maybe it's just my group of students, but this pressure to perform is so intense. It feels like it's just weighing down, and they do that in relationship to their faith too. It's not just in relationship to career and body and social relationships and intimate, but it's like in relationship to God too. They feel like there's like a certain standard that they have to perform. It's really troubling to me.
So in campus ministry, you've got a community, a place.
Yeah.
Again, that's a kind of counterculture.
Yeah.
Where in classroom, in the pursuit of a degree, there's this constant demand to perform.
Yeah.
And now there's opportunity to explore and to do that without performative expectations.
Yeah.
Or they bring them along, but now there's an opportunity for gracefulness,
Yeah.
for authenticity, for having questions that don't in fact come to solution quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, again, that's what we strive for.
Yeah.
I was also going to say about this last slide, there's a number of my colleagues that are much better at I am than going out and engaging the whole campus, particularly antagonists or philosophers. So they'll set up tents on the mall that say, rant to me about religion or whatever, and routinely engage with folks. And one of the things that us campus pastors like to talk about is when people tell you they don't believe in God, you can say, well, tell me about the God that you don't believe in. And then that gets to that slide before, right, where 78% are about miracles and some kind of belief in God, because there's something that they're reacting to. So they still have a belief in the holy, perhaps.
Yes.
But this image, this narrative that they've been given about who Jesus is, who the church is, whatever, that they've absorbed from pop culture or whatever, that's what they don't believe in. And then that opens up an opportunity to really tell the story, which is exciting.
Yeah. And I wonder, my experience has been in those mutual conversations, in those mutual discovery journeys, they teach me.
Yeah.
Many of my worn uses of what I learned in seminary or have used over the years get opened up by this kind of fresh wonderment.
Nothing like working with young adults to keep you fresh, right?
Yeah. So let's take a look at some of what we're talking about in regard to practices.
Okay, good.
Okay? What I'm going to do now is to bring together some of what I've seen in the articles and the books that were the literature background, including the study of religion and spirituality done at UCLA, which was the primary study that we use as the backdrop to the Concordia study. I'm going to harvest some of that and invite you into a dialogue around your sense of what these best strategic practices are and their promising possibilities. Here are just a few. First of all, some strategic practices that I saw come up everywhere. The seeking to develop a genuinely welcoming community, whatever that looks like. It has to have in it something that says, I'm interested in you, and I'm interested in you as you are, rather than who I want you to be.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to think that way, it's another thing to work that out. Secondly, authentic relationships, and we've already gotten into some of that. The importance of multiple relationships. In fact, someone talked about having 3 or 4 people engaged in each other's lives around authenticity, availability, and affirmation as being critical elements. And some have cited Search Institute's developmental relationships, the 5 categories and the 20 activities as excellent ways to pursue the development of authentic relationships. Connect always. As I worked my way through this literature, obviously several places lifted up and worked with digital ministries or internet ministries, a whole variety of ways of doing that, from Bible studies online, blogging, prayer processes around new programs and apps, something like Caring Bridge, to a whole variety of ways of constantly being in conversation with one another via texting and so forth. And also including, many of them were weaving together the print culture out of which so much of contemporary faith has come, in terms of ideas, in terms of stating ideas in particularly connected ways, logical ways, a kind of USA Today, putting together of fact ideas and factoids around questions and so forth. But then also the inclusion, the critical inclusion of genuine face-to-face, real-time human experience and speaking to one another in words of story and hugs and so forth. So connect, and connect always seem to stand out in that process. Meaningful service was everywhere there in terms of both being engaged in activities that matter to other people and doing so in a way that a person understands is in fact making a difference. Making a difference and making a contribution were put together in terms of those processes. Realistic symbolic practices, first an emphasis on symbolic. Many of the studies pointed out that about 8 to 12% of the young adults are powerfully drawn to ancient, very traditional, sacred practices because they communicate something other than the current, other than the regular, and reach across from other generations with meanings that connect deeply with visual and symbolic practices or experiences among or within human beings. But that if these symbols, these rituals, these rites are going to be meaningful, they have to connect to some realistic sense of value added or questions. And so many of these ministries were working on putting together this combination of that which sweeps up the concrete, the particular, the realistic, at the same time that it connects it with ancient practices. Relevant engagement and contributions, an opportunity for persons to make a difference, but to make a difference around that which they saw to be relevant in terms of their lives. Many campus ministries spoke of peer ministers and peer ministers on the ground in athletics, in resident halls, in groups of people who were working on addiction, so that their contribution might be made in those places where young people were, in fact, their colleagues were, in fact, fragile, and they also were struggling. And shared participatory leadership, whether it's a peer or intergenerational, almost all the pieces that I looked at in terms of best practices brought into practice some of the best of most actively. A young adult person becomes a part of that which they can participate in shaping and working. Some promising possibilities out of this, and I won't spend much time with them other than to just set them in front of you. It's fascinating to see the work that Search has done in terms of developmental relationships and to think about the possibilities of campus ministry and young adult ministry being thoroughly intergenerational. I hope so. I think that as a person in the last third of the arc of life, I need young adults in my life. I rely on them, in fact, particularly my grandkids in that regard and others in the neighborhood. I think we can share life together. Given the bite world of high stimuli in which we live, to have some opportunity to put our lives into stories and to set those life stories alongside of the God story. We've already talked about diverse symbolic worship settings and practices. One of the campus ministries I know takes the Psalms and the variety of Psalms, from the celebratory to the Psalms that are dealing with the depths of despair, and they go to places on campus where that's being worked out and pray in those particular places and do, if you will, meetups, experiencing prayer and bringing thanksgiving and intercession into those particular places on campus. Spark searching, the possibility of, together with young adults, finding their passions, mapping their passions, and seeing where those passions might go in terms of connecting them to their life journeys. Pursuing faith and life questions, the possibility of using what we know existentially about what we all work at. Who am I? How do I belong? Making meaning everywhere, I think, offers promise or entrees. Pilgrimages, I mentioned the young man who went to Central America, which he identified as a dramatic pilgrimage that changed his life. We talk about those in terms of justice journeys, but we can also talk about those in terms of formation, tezay, and those kinds of processes. Discipleship communities where people are brought together to work and deepen their following of Jesus and what that's looked like. And we've talked about already how all of this can be best served by a transmedial process. Let's just stop a moment. This can be an overwhelming listing, but it also can be an awareness that maybe ministry with young adults is a culture with many doorways.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in hearing about a doorway or two in that community that is campus ministry at the university.
Can you say more?
You talked about a community of 50 or so.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways those young men and women come into campus ministry? You and I met at what I think is a coffee house of sorts, and also a campus ministry venue. Has to be one of the doorways.
I think that their friendships and their relationships, our students aren't afraid to bring their friends, and so most of our new people find us by walking through that door. We have a lot of folks that kind of hang out at the periphery, and we have outreach events intentionally to give them spaces where they can come and just do things once a month. So beer and hymns, or we do faith and leadership institutes where people can hear community leaders talk about how their faith undergirds and inspires their work, business leaders and hard scientists and activists and all kinds of stuff. And that is really a way for us to introduce or draw in people who aren't interested in worship necessarily, but want to have meaningful conversation.
I think those are doorways.
Yeah.
And for there to be a plethora of those doorways is, I think, an interesting proposition.
Yeah.
The question then becomes who's available to exercise all of those.
Yeah.
What I want to do, I'm looking at time, I'm going to take us to the Concordia example just quickly before we pick up and get at some questions. The experience of Concordia is obviously highly contextual, as all of yours are. This is a private liberal arts college in the upper Midwest, Moorhead, Minnesota. And so it exists in some ways in the Bible Belt of the North. And so all of that's there. But it also is a place that has connections around the world through its language villages and its MESEM. So we saw an incredible amount of international impact in terms of what was going on. I'm going to share some of the pieces that in fact came out of the study. I've asked Don Ramza to put a fuller summary of this study online, so it's available. So should you be interested, you can get into 12 pages, and if you're really interested, you can contact me, and I'll provide you 120 pages of the study in terms of what went on. But here's some of what came from this, and I present it not as the way or the best way, or not even a way, particularly, but I present it as an encouragement to get into the what I would call the generativity and the genius of your particular setting, what God is already up to, and what the possibilities can be there. Here's what we learned. That rather than a campus ministry, we discovered a culture of multiple practices and many entree points, including other co-curricular and curricular aspects of it itself. that this experience of faith and spirituality was widely diverse, and there was a widely diverse sense of what was going on, widely diverse values and effectiveness. It was not one thing in terms of what was happening. In fact, the Catholic Cobbers were one of the most interesting and powerful groups on campus who were connected with a parish just up the street and were one of the most dynamic intergenerational presence on the whole campus. At the same time, Crew was holding services on Sunday evenings, sometimes seemed to be competitive with what else was going on, and they were connecting Muslims with the imam in town so that the 6 or 7 Muslims that we talked to felt that they had an experience where they could in fact be valued and practice their faith. Obviously, a broad spectrum of theologies, commitments, and practices were at work, and one of the tasks, the challenges, was to support those theologies, commitments, and practices and their differences, and at the same time bring them into conversation with one another. And this came out of the next. This is a college that's robustly Christian and Lutheran, with an equally robust, decidedly interfaith emphasis. What they mean by that is that they see matters of faith and religion, spirituality, meaning-making to be a part of what it means to be an excellent academic institution. So for it to be studied in the classroom, in religion, for it to be brought up as issues in philosophy classes and humanity classes is in keeping with intellectual integrity and honesty. At the same time, they believe that if it's going to be questioned and looked at, it ought to be practiced strongly on campus so that Lutheranism is practiced in its best, but there's an encouragement for others, such as the Catholic Cobbers, such as Reformed and Evangelicals, to practice powerfully on campus, and then to bring these as much as possible into conversation with one another. For all this to happen, multiple individuals and teams, many of them staff and faculty, some of them off-campus people, some of them campus ministry people, are engaged in this process. And if you've been along with me so far in the description, you know there's going to be conflict and tension. And it's not one thing. There are a lot of tensions. And in fact, that, I think, is a piece of reality itself outside the campus bubble. And so one of the questions that campus ministry faces is how to work with it and provide, if you will, what I would call generative ways of getting at all of this. Mm-hmm. Connected by a complex set of relationships and organizations, strong off-campus community resources and support are available to students. In fact, students worship more often off-campus than they do on campus. And in part, that's because there's not an on-campus congregation. So students are encouraged to worship on weekends off campus. 60% of students say they worship regularly off campus, which is a fascinating notion. So out of this has come now some changes. The Office of Religious and Spiritual Life will in fact incorporate campus ministry. There will be a word and sacrament, a word and service, and a faith and life person. This will be a 3-person office. And then they created a faith and life table where the network of resources on campus, including some for example, one of the teachers in the office of business who teaches business ethics is at that table. So there are faculty and staff as well as campus ministry people. Well, that gives you a snapshot. It's obviously a very different place than what you experience. My guess is, however, there would be some of these dynamics going on around you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In some ways, I feel like we model them. I'm looking for you guys. I'm staring at this screen right now. This is the same PowerPoint that you can see behind us. I feel like in some ways we, in our campus ministry settings, as we seek to engage the university, are little microcosms. And then I also want to argue with that notion, because I think our call as campus ministries on public university campuses is it's just a very different, we're at the margins instead of at the center. And so building and maintaining relationships takes longevity and capacity and real commitment to be to draw faculty and staff together, to have relationships with university administration, to do any of this stuff. It takes a very long time. And it's really fun when it happens because the hunger that I've experienced in the student body for these sorts of conversations that might happen at a place like Concordia is there, and nobody's doing it because they can't. Like, that's not their call at a public university. And so then the question for campus ministries, I think, is how do we kind of come alongside the university and create spaces for conversations about meaning and purpose that directly engage particular faith of the students. So it's not that coming alongside isn't like a Christian kind of evangelical move. It's saying it is deeply important to think critically about faith and spirituality in relationship to your discipline and relationships to the moral and ethical decisions that you're making and you will be making. And so how do we, first of all, build trust with the university, and then second of all, figure out ways to resource that work in the scrappy way that we do.
As I listen to you, I hear you articulating well a significant difference that can be generative in both differing settings in each, however, provides challenges in each. At Concordia, I mean, the president and the Board of Regents and the faculty, by and large, say this is going to be at the center of who we are. And at times that's a gift. At other times, that can in fact be numbing and difficult. So there's a whole lot that's just not talked about and worked at. You're talking about being at the margins, which in some ways is
freedom.
It's freedom. It is, and it also provides the challenges in many ways that faith faces elsewhere.
It's
Culturally.
very true.
And so it's on the one hand, it provides challenge in terms of, so how does one have handholds within the community or has access? But on the other hand, it's reality. You work with things as they are in the world in many ways.
It's not such an integrated experience as it is at I'm a product of a private Lutheran school, and it's a very integrated experience. But the students don't necessarily experience their education that way, where faith, like questions of faith and spirituality, are integrated into disciplines, and vocation is a word that everybody knows and doesn't assume it means like vo-tech school.
So it's maybe been done, and in some ways the UCLA study reflects this in terms of religion and spirituality. But I don't think there's been an action research study like we did at Concordia. It'd be fun to come to the university and do it there.
No, I agree. It would be. Want to do it?
Let's talk.
Okay.
We've got a few minutes left. Let's just cite some of these questions and then get after a couple of them.
Okay.
Okay? First, I'll just set them out. From California, what would you say are the most essential marks of a Christ-like life in the world and the most essential practices of faith that fully engage personal and social transformation? Think about that a little. I'm going to set the other questions in front of people. Okay, marks of a Christian life or a Christ-like life and practices. From California, and also, how might we move beyond racial dialogue to strategic transformation to look more like the global face of Christ? Huge, I think. Texas, how does one approach those who may be gun-shy about Christianity due to their, that should be past, experiences with Christians? A few others, with all their commitments and distractions, what context for learning and formation are most effective with young adults? Huge issue. Finding some kind of a space in people's consciousness. Give a young adult from Pennsylvania, give the young adult comfort connection with their parents. How does this affect the roles of their mentors? How do we engage young adults who have wandered from the church? I mean, what kind of opportunity do we have even to be in connection with them? And what are the best practices for engaging non-Christian young adults or non-Lutheran and then forming them? Well, there are places, I think, where all these questions connect with some of what we've been doing. I'd like to go back to the first question. What would you say are the most essential marks of a Christ-like life in the world and the most essential practices of faith that fully engage personal and social transformation? So just
Big question.
Yeah, just off the top, if you were to talk about some of those marks,
Yeah.
what comes to mind for you?
Well, I would say a robust understanding of how one's grounding in Jesus Christ calls us out into the world to be co-creators in God's new day. I mean, I think that I'm answering a kind of a really hard question with a really vague answer, but so the mark may be like a response to the love of God being a genuine engagement and a responsible engagement with the world. But I think that articulation, like students' understanding of the connection, is actually very important. Because that, like how you understand yourself as co-creator might shift and change throughout your life. So to have that kind of critical, reflective, like theological dialogue kind of built in will help you continue to engage throughout life as you consider how it is that your gifts and your talents might best be used in our world.
So I mean, I just put this to you, and you're thinking on your feet.
Yeah.
That sounds a little like the way Jesus headed out into his world.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
And engaged folks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you just, I think you have to be, I mean, this is like, we have to be adaptive, and I think students in this next century are going to have to be very adaptive. And so how do we, like, rather than kind of sending them off like as a boxed set, like out into the world, like how do we give them the practices that they need to continue growing into those marks? I don't think those marks will be fully formed, but how do we give them the tools that they need to continue seeking God and trying to make a difference in our world?
So as I think of that, I think of a community of inquiry.
Yeah,
Whether that's life or scripture.
Yeah.
And I think of practices like dwelling in the Word, dwelling in the world,
Yeah.
Doing spiritual discernment together,
Yeah.
Justice, pilgrimages, and journey.
Yeah.
I'd love to keep this conversation going. I'm aware of time.
We're out of time.
We're out of time.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks
in
everybody.
All of this. Thanks for coming and being a part of this conversation. All the best. Be well. I took it that clock was accurate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right on.
Every time I engage this, I come away thinking, first of all, how interesting it is. It cuts way back when I went to my first call in Southern California.